Thank you very much, Julie, and welcome everybody to Borderless Broadcasting. I'm Rosemary Westwood, as Susan introduced me, and I'm going to allow our very diverse panel of content creators to introduce themselves, starting with Zach.
Hi, my name is Zach Smith. I want to first thank the OMBC for having me out here today. I'm really excited about an engaging discussion around our industry today and the evolution of content, how it's migrating across platforms. I'm the Senior Vice President of Branded Content at Defy Media. Defy Media is a company that was formed very recently, actually, last year, a few months ago, out of the merger between Break Media and Alloy Digital. These are two companies that are well established in both online content and in reaching the digital generation. So we're a content company and a distribution company. We're focused on creating engaging content for the 12 to 34 demographic across an owned and operated network that generates over 125 million unique viewers each month. You might know some of our properties, Smosh and Break.com. Break and Smosh together combined to create one of the most popular comedy brands online. We also really focus in the entertainment vertical. We think this is an area that demographic is very interested in. We own a network of YouTube channels called Clever. Clever distributes over 70 million views a month across its network, ranging from topics including gaming, movies, television, and everything covering pop culture. Gaming is another vertical that we're very much interested in. We have the fastest growing YouTube channel in Smosh Games, as well as one of the most robust off YouTube channels in The Escapist, which has become a destination for hardcore gamers. And then we focus on men's and women's lifestyle. Made Man is a top 10 men's lifestyle site, and we have other sites, including The Gloss, which are more female driven. Those are just some of the properties, but we're really focused today more than ever in reaching out across both YouTube, web properties, mobile, and over-the-top solutions. So we understand that this audience wants to consume content on their own terms, when they want and where they want, and we're dedicated to creating an environment in which they can do just that. As the Senior VP of Branded Content, I'm really focused on working with Fortune 500 brands to create engaging content that can both satisfy our audience's needs as well as their marketing objectives. It can range from brand integration to more sponsored programs that simply come from the brand. Ultimately, we want to make sure we're serving the needs of our audience first and foremost, but we think there's an opportunity to do both, and that's really what my job is tasked with on a daily basis.
Great, thank you, Zach. And Adam?
I'm Adam Pincus. I head programming and production for Group M Entertainment North America. Group M is a media planning and buying agency, a large conglomerate of operating companies that works all around the world. And Group M Entertainment is a division within that uses our relationship with media owners to invest in the creation of programming assets with producers and publishers and broadcasters. We do a fair amount of business in Canada and actually have worked with Julie back at the CBC on things like All for One with Debbie Travis. We have a scripted show on the air right now called Cracked. We've worked with Rogers and others here, primarily in television and a little bit in digital. In the US, the situation is somewhat reversed because of the nature of the media landscape there. And there we're primarily working with digital publishers to create new IP, including with Defy Media. So it's very cozy up here. And I think our point of view is that there needs to be new ways. There's a huge demand for storytelling given the proliferation of media platforms. There need to be new ways to finance that, new ways to distribute that, new ways to incubate ideas that can grow and cross platforms. And as Julie said, find different ways to engage audiences across television, digital platforms, and mobile. So we're very interested in trying to find the kinds of producers, networks, and publishers who want those kind of innovative relationships. And prior to coming to Group M, I was in television earlier in my career, but immediately prior to this, I worked at an agency doing branded content. So I have a little time in the trenches in that field as well. And I think that the relationship that advertisers have, which I think is central to our business model and our reason for being, is that they need to play a different role in the genesis of content than they have historically just because of the way that the financial models work. So again, I'm very happy to be here and talk to you all.
And Vikas is next to Adam.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Vikas Gupta. I'm the CEO and president of Trans Gaming. We're headquartered here in Toronto. We've also got offices in Tel Aviv, Kiev, as well as a small R&D office in Ottawa. We specialize in the development of technology that acts as a platform that allows us to migrate content, specifically in this case video games, across different platforms and different devices without the need for any redevelopment. We've applied this technology to emerging devices like connected televisions, connected set-top boxes, and other over-the-top devices, where we're now taking high-quality video games, customizing the experience, and then making those experiences available directly in the living room. We believe that the living room is the most common social hub, obviously, of the home, and as opposed to providing consumers with just traditional linear media, we're now providing a complementary television viewing experience that involves interactive as well. So we're doing deals all over the world with cable companies. We've announced deals with television manufacturers such as Samsung, Toshiba, Philips. And what we're really trying to do is bring high-quality entertainment from an interactive perspective to consumers on all the various different devices that they use, typically on the bigger screens.
Thanks, Vikas and Julie. We started with a great introduction of a lot of your career, but it'd be great if you could talk a little about your current company and maybe talk about this NHL project in terms of how that's different from the types of partnerships and projects and sort of ways you've looked at platforms from the CBC in the past.
Well, I think the interesting thing about one of the motivations, and we spoke about it earlier on our prep call for me to make a change in my career, was the opportunities that we're all talking about up here with the way that the production of content, the distribution of content, and the partnerships that we're talking about here, and the way of thinking that I know was touched on in the keynote about collaborative thinking. So my real impetus was to say there's real opportunities out there in the marketplace to think about the creation of content, the distribution of content differently. And what I like about this first project is it's for 2 specialty channels and 2 conventional broadcasters in both the US and in Canada, and again, iTunes, Daily Beast. It's I think a poster child for what as a content maker, what we have to think about when we're trying to create content that has the widest possible impact, and to be able to create a story or a content plan for a series, both from the way you produce it, the way you think about it, and growing something from just a television show into what I call a content movement. So I think there's real opportunities to do that, and as producers of content, we really have to be thinking about that from the very beginning. And as I said earlier, to re-engineer the production process to be able to create content that meets all of these various needs.
So you've come from that more, I guess, for lack of a better word, editorial content production side, and we have some people with a long experience in branded and advertising side of content. Can you, Adam and Zach, maybe jump in here and talk a little bit about how you see the art of the digital deal? What are some of the components to that, and who are you going after for this content? Who are your, is everybody a broadcaster now? Those kinds of things.
I think everyone is a broadcaster today, thanks to our friends at YouTube. I think anyone can be a broadcaster. The key components to a digital deal, in my opinion, to have a successful digital program involve distribution, an advertiser, and talent. In no particular, not necessarily in that order, but you need distribution. At the end of the day, there's a lot of quality content being produced, and unfortunately, not all of it can be seen. I think we're all inundated with too much content, and we can talk a little bit later, hopefully, about even what is content, because it used to just be video. Now there's gaming. A lot of gamers are spending time watching other people play games on places like Twitch. So, if you're I think first and foremost, you need to have a strong distribution platform that reaches a targeted audience. Secondarily, you need an advertiser in many cases. We have a network and we're investing in content very, very aggressively. But at the same time, much of the revenue derived from a network like ours is through advertising, and much of the production much of the high production value content, much of the more expensive high budget content is going to be financed by advertisers. And thirdly, you need talent. Advertisers want to make sure that content's going to be seen and don't want to rely on paid media to drive those views. Part of what Defy Media has is a very robust social network. So across all of our properties, we deliver 50 million followers across all of our own properties. That helps populate a new show, that helps drive audience to a new show, and it helps cross-promote between them. So when you have verticals that are very established, in gaming, for instance, when we launch a new show that we think would be interesting to the gaming audience, we not only can promote from The Escapist through editorial and so through social, but we also have Smosh Games and other gaming channels within our network to make sure that it gets to the right audience. But talent is key, and I think how we define talent is constantly evolving. Just because someone is popular offline, if they haven't taken the time to invest in growing their own social audience, they're likely not going to be as interesting to us or to an advertiser. I think more and more advertisers are starting to understand the value of YouTube influencers and helping to grow their brand and helping to migrate or socially discover their content.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of interesting ideas in what you just brought up there. I think one thing that I would say is that the digital deal is not necessarily exclusively a digital deal, as I think Julie was referencing. Cross-platform promotion, at least, of content, I think remains very powerful. And a lot of the things that we've done, particularly with advertisers where scale and earned media is so much a part of their equation, some television presence is a really useful thing to have in the set. One of the issues, just speaking about deal making purely, is that a lot of rights issues come up in that environment where how exactly are we defining this? What, for instance, if you're using any guild talent, exactly what deals are you able to cut there, and what does that have to do with your financing? Because often that pushes the cost of the production into a strata that you don't want to be in. You can't afford to be in, and you can't even monetize and recoup from. So I think thinking about it as cross-platform content has a lot of value, but it also has some challenges. I would also say that the owned and operated model has some limitations as well. I think scale is a really important thing, and so syndication and social promotion are really important. And Julie mentioned seeding with super tweeters and the like of that. That's, in terms of the digital ecosystem and getting content out there, is a really important consideration. You need to be thinking not just about we're going to be driving audiences in a traditional way back to a place where they're going to consume this content, but we're going to put this content in front of them wherever they are. Now, hopefully they will follow that to watch more of it, but that's not a sure thing either. So the last point I want to just pick up on is the business models of it. At least in television, there's a model that's in place where the content will sort of self-liquidate to some extent. There's a way that you can pay for it. In digital, the high production value content doesn't really have that yet, except for with advertisers. And the challenge with that, I think, is when you need an advertiser to foot a substantial part of the bill, they have a substantial seat at the table in terms of their editorial expectations. And that pushes you often into a place that feels a little bit like branded content or advertising, which can be, if not executed really, really well, kind of a turnoff to the audience. So it's a little bit at cross purposes with its intention. And that's just a challenge that needs to get navigated very carefully.
I agree, if I can just pick up on that. I think one of the things that we're starting to see, though, Adam, is that the more that you see established franchises gaining audience online, there's certain shows across our network I can point to, like Man at Arms, which is on a channel called Ami, is essentially a show of weaponry where this blacksmith works and recreates weapons that are at mass scale. So it's this show has picked up a very organic audience, and I think we're seeing more and more advertisers starting to follow that. Not unlike television. Before, in the early ages of television, we would see sponsors playing a very important role in sort of serving not only as a title sponsor but influencing that creative. I think digital is now starting to grow up to the point where we're starting to see real organic success. And advertisers wanting to just get the halo effect of surrounding a popular piece of content that has a guaranteed audience coming to it on a weekly basis.
I think I just wanted to add to that because I think the idea of halo effect with sponsors is really an important one, because I think that takes the conversation from product integration or branded entertainment to what kind of content does an advertiser or sponsor want to be associated with. So it's not as, it's not necessarily as crude as just saying insert product here. I mean, we're looking at, the association with great content, I think, is where most of the sponsors and most of the brands want to be. But I really agree with Adam that the challenges are that the traditional business models are evolving, but for example, that still financing a television show with big production values, from my perspective, television is the biggest barker, so, you still need that kind of budget if you're going to produce all of those ancillary content, if it's going to be at the level that people might want to share it in that way. And I think the other thing is that the worldwide clearances is absolutely true. How you make sure from the outset that you're thinking about the way this content is going to be used on every platform and distributed in that way, and make sure that the music you use and make sure that everything that goes into your production is clearable and not going to escalate the cost for the distributor or for the production. And the other thing that I think is really interesting, you saw it on that little clip, is when you have different advertisers or sponsors in different territories, you then have to tailor the content for them as well, which is easy to do, but you have to be thinking about that when you go into the creation of the content. You can't just think of that as an afterthought, because it's important for Coors in this particular case and Gatorade, Coors Light in the States, Gatorade in Canada, to be associated with all the content, including the viral content that's going out. So that's the way that the relationship gets to be defined with the users.
If I can jump in from a little bit of a different perspective, one of the things that's interesting now is that with the availability of content on so many different devices, there is devaluation of content that's also going on. People have become very accustomed to consuming content for free or for less and less pricing. We're seeing that in the games industry, and certainly we're seeing that with linear media as well. Content, I believe 10 years ago, was worth about $2.50 per hour. That value has now dropped to 25 cents per hour. And we'll continue to see that drop over the next few years because we have a plethora of content because of the disintermediation of the traditional distribution channels and whatnot. So now what ends up happening is that advertisers still, agreeably, they say that television-based advertising is still going to be the highest form of advertising, it's still the highest value. But the moment you start to bring some of that linear media over to iPads and other devices, that advertising dollar actually has far less impact because of the consumption that we're starting to see change. And we're seeing this happen in the games industry as well, where people are no longer paying for content. They want that content completely for free. They want to be the ones in charge of how much do I pay for this, how much do I not. So you want very high volume of access. And then ultimately, it's up to the developers to determine, are we going to engage the consumer effectively enough in order to generate revenue?
And what about the challenges for smaller content producers, for all of you to jump in within this climate? Do they need to have a big name? We talked about the chopper well before. Do they need a big name, or are there other ways that they can get in? And
I mean, I think the beauty about content today is that, with Kickstarter and places like Chill, there's opportunities for independent content creators to get their fans to finance their content for them. They don't need to go through the traditional model of going to a network or even going to a distributor. We are open for ideas, and we certainly want to hear them. But the key, I think, today is to build up your own social audience, build up your own fans by using all of the platforms available to you, whether that's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, custom editorial. Let your voice be heard. The people the creators that really are driving, I think, innovation, the ones that are in a position to finance their own content, are consistently sharing their story across all mediums. And that opens up the opportunity for the fans to then support what they want to do. So I think the community aspect of what we talked about earlier in the keynote, there is a community there that wants to support, creation. I think you just have to, again, work on allowing that to take place.
Or building partnerships, really. I spoke about it a little bit earlier, but I find the partnership that we have with the Daily Beast is unusual because they don't usually cover this kind of content, but they have 15 million unique visitors to their site every month, and that's a whole other audience for what traditionally will have been seen as sports content. So when we're trying to find our ways to new audiences to build interest, I think that partnerships are key, and collaborative thinking, back to what was spoken about earlier, and just the ability really to form partnerships where they weren't before, I think is a way to get into your business in a meaningful way.
I think also maybe an answer about the smaller players is a little bit embedded in what Zach was saying earlier. Talent is so important, but the definition of what talent is pretty elastic. And there is such kind of an organic, kind of endemic type of talent to a lot of the digital world that is honestly even kind of confusing and baffling to me as somebody who comes from maybe more traditional media. Like, that is popular, it's hugely popular. They have a huge following in a way that, as you say, some traditional sort of celebrity talent who comes into a digital environment but haven't cultivated their footprint there or their sort of, their identity in a digital environment will not perform as well. I don't know how transferable that is out of that environment, but within that environment, there are all kinds of organic stars. And that, I think, says good things about the potential for smaller players to make a big impact. Because, I mean, I even look at Smosh, I don't know where that came from, but it's huge.
Huge. And I'm glad you mentioned the fact that, again, these, there are digital stars that don't have any intention of going over and crossing over to television. Smosh, we've taken the brand a lot of different places. Ian and Anthony, they'll have done incredibly well with what they started on YouTube. In 2006, they started as two friends in high school, and they were one of the grandfathers of YouTube, consistently creating comedic sketch videos. They put out, again, a sketch video every week on Fridays. They've been doing that since they started, and that's now evolved into a business comprised of 5 YouTube channels, a merchandising empire, and an app as well. So again, they're very focused on digital success. So I don't want anyone here to think that you have to migrate to be successful. When it makes sense for the content, migration can be a great story to tell, and it can work for everyone. But you don't always have to do that. I think I would recommend any creator to sort of, again, pick the platform that is best to tell their story, and think about how to use all the other, how your content might interface with all the other screens available to you. We talked on our pre-call about sort of how you need to think about the screen, how you need to sort of better understand, at the very least, how users are consuming content differently across a mobile device or an iPad than they would on a television.
I was just going to add, I think you're completely right. The idea that some content is not transferable. In my own house, my teenage daughters have been fixated on Ryan Hinga, a big, and he can't translate necessarily into television, and he shouldn't. That's a medium where he should be. I mean, I think comedy really lends itself just to stay, in one distribution platform digitally sometimes. And I think that it's not about thinking this piece of content or this project, how am I going to seed it everywhere? And not every piece of content's made for that. The clip that I showed is because it's a timely story, it's access driven, and it's got lots of tentacles to it. But I completely agree, there is some content that is just going to be focused in one place to one audience, and that doesn't make it any less powerful.
In order to know that, though, you need to know the different technologies out there. You need to know what the different platforms are. And I'm wondering if each of you think about being up on technology. Do all content producers have to be tech connoisseurs in order to be able to make those decisions around what kind of content they have and where it belongs?
I think I'm not a technology expert, but I watch the consumption patterns. And I have my own private little focus group and a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old, which is perfect. But, it's, you have to know, yes, is the answer. You don't have to be an expert in it, but you certainly have to know how people are consuming media. It's part of what we do, because how else would you know which part of which story should get to your audience in which way? That's a fundamental question that we absolutely all need to understand.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier. I think you don't need to be a technology expert. You need to be, I think, a well-informed consumer and understand what kinds of content works in what kinds of formats and what kinds of platforms, what the experience is watching something on your phone versus watching something on a tablet or on a desktop at various times of day versus a television, because they do have a huge impact on narrative strategies and format strategies and what type of content is going to work in what environment. Now, I personally would have no idea what authoring something for a phone entails, and I hope to never know that. But
I think it's an awareness thing. I think you don't have to be a technology expert, because I think there's enough out there today, but you have to be aware of what the triggers are to be able to get the kind of traction. And I think it's really important to think about user engagement in this case. A lot of people like self-broadcast, and that's great if it's a purely private ego thing. If you actually want any kind of real traction, then it comes down to how do we actually engage the broader user community. The term viral goes around a lot. I think it's overused, but how do we make whatever we're doing viral? I'll take this off on a different tangent though, because when we think about content, and we talked about a definition of content as well, we're talking about content right now from a very linear perspective, but content today has to be interactive as well. So even if it's self-broadcast, there has to be some level of interactivity where click on this to see another blah, blah, blah video of me, singing in the bathtub or what have you. But in the games world, I think there are a lot of lessons that are coming from interactive entertainment that apply to linear media and very traditional linear media at that. Companies like Zynga, who I'm sure everyone knows, they've actually done a great job of pioneering user engagement because what they do is they collect data on absolutely everything. And what they're also doing is they're training the consumer and changing consumer behavior, which I think applies in every world, linear or interactive. So they teach you, well, click on this, and this kind of magic happens. Well, click on this, you'll see rainbows and bunny rabbits. And then click on this, and you'll see this happen. And then at some point, when you try and click on this, well, you can't do that anymore because it doesn't click. Or if you want it to click, well, you've got to pay 50 cents or $1, et cetera. So now what's happening is that because they've engaged the consumer in a certain unique way, that consumer is sitting there saying, well, I'm going to pay for this because I've invested 8 hours of my life and I'm not going to keep doing this forever. So 50 cents, boom, off we go. And then there it begins. And now we're talking amazing consumer stickiness. And just to really take that point home, just throw out a number. Anyone here with Farmville in particular know what the top spender is actually spending on a per month basis? Throw out a number, anyone? Close, $15,000 a month, consistently, so $180,000 over a year. That's pretty good engagement if you ask me. And this is all about simple, iterative tools, not a huge investment in broadcast, value, but we've got consumers who are willing to spend that kind of money because they've been engaged the right way. And I think there's a lot of power to that that then starts to apply on the different mediums and the different forms of distribution.
One of the things I guess that I'd be concerned about with mixing game mechanics with content is that, something that creates revenue for the game developer, and certainly, are we genuinely adding value to that experience for the gamer, or are we just creating a way to incentivize them to or motivate them to spend money in the game? So my concern is if we start to layer on technology tools to content, and I've had some meetings where people have developed some very interesting technology that layers Twitter and Instagram into story, that we start to get far away from character and start to get away from the traditional storytelling mechanics in a way that's inauthentic to the story. And I don't think we can sacrifice story for technology, I guess is what I'm saying.
The key word there is traditional. You said the word traditional. And I think that's the break that we have to have, right? That's the evolution, because we're moving away from traditional media into something that's very, very different, high accessibility. People being able to choose how much they want to spend based on their own consumption habits. So I think we're all very biased towards we watch TV a certain way, we consume media a certain way. But the reality is that if it's done correctly, and I'm not saying technology necessarily, but if it's done correctly and you start to design content from the ground up with these kinds of considerations, I think you'll get way better engagement and the opportunity to generate revenue is far, far greater. The whole theory of gamification is becoming very, very big, and it applies to everything beyond games, because games fundamentally know how to engage audiences.
Are you saying because that you think traditional content producers aren't cut out for success in the future, the digital space?
I wouldn't go that far, but
Okay.
look, I will say, I think, we talked about this earlier. If we go back in time a little bit, and we talk about the integration of not necessarily technology, but the integration of consumer engagement. American Idol was one of the first productions to do this. Huge production value, but they said, we're going to make the consumer population that's watching our show the ones in charge of who the winner is. So we started off with very sophisticated technology. You could either text, or you could call an 800 number and vote for who you wanted. The voice came along, and all of a sudden you're now tweeting who you want to have, win, this and that. Even in linear media, we're starting to see some really great integration where it's done the right way of technology, social media, the ability to look at trends in order to be able to influence the outcome. And I would argue 100% that a lot of that thinking and a lot of that learning is coming from the video games and the interactive media industry. And we're going to see a lot more of that. And jokingly and somewhat seriously, we talked about this before. I mean, this dates back, I think, 20 years to Choose Your Own Adventure. That's narrative, that is storytelling. But I remember as a kid, I'm reading a book, and you can go to this page to try this storyline, or go to this page to try this storyline. That's interactive storytelling at its finest, without the use of any technology.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would maybe dispute a little bit is to say, I don't know that we're moving away from so much as we are adding to. And I think that there is a role for traditional linear storytelling in people's lives because it's a behavior people really embrace. I think that watching a fantastic hour of drama on television is a very satisfying experience. Watching a movie is a very satisfying experience. It's not the only kind of experience we can have now.
Totally agree with that.
And I'll just say, watching political debates or election returns on television without Twitter open on a tablet is not as good. It's much better to do hashtag Diane Sawyer is drunk when you're watching ABC, and that really was additive.
Most
right.
recent case, but yeah.
In the most recent case, exactly. That is truly additive to the experience. I think that I have also seen a lot of fascinating technologies where I was incredibly skeptical about the user behavior that would lead you to do that. Like, do I want somebody calling me on my cell phone while I'm watching something to add some layer to the story? I do not.
Right.
I think there's certain, I agree with what everybody's saying, and I think that the genre that's most open to the kind of engagement that you're speaking about obviously is live television, because I think Idol and those shows where you can actually participate and turn the show into, create some play-along value with that show, with the viewers, live shows and live-to-tape shows really create that environment. And my former colleague Tessa Spruill, who's looking at her computer over there, and she and I worked a lot on programs that actually created that kind of engagement. And one of the things that we did in the 7th season of Dragon's Den, which again, back to my audience of 2 at home, we created an interactive real-time game to go with the show, that while you're watching the show, you could say, would you have invested in that? Did the dragons do the right thing? And then that content would pop up on screen. So essentially turning that television show into a game. And the first night that was on, I had my iPad, I was sitting down. My daughters have never watched Dragon's Den. They could care less. They came up, said, what are you doing? I said, I'm playing this game. They took my iPad and they played the whole show. And I thought, that's turning a TV show into a game for a totally different demographic who could have cared less to watch that on TV. Yep. But when we created this opportunity for them to play along, they were right there for the whole hour.
Yeah.
I'm just going to cut us off here and ask one last question before we open it up to the audience. Just touching on some of that, though, if you could each talk about success to you. Is success measured in the engagement in that way, or is it the shares and tweets, or is it that you've hit the right demographic? And following on that, what can content producers here, for example, do to get your attention? What are you looking for from people in order to achieve that success?
Success really depends on who we're talking to. So each advertiser, if we're developing branded content for them, will have different KPIs that we're working towards, and so they'll dictate what success means to them on a given program, and we'll work with them to achieve that. As a network, at just Defy Media, when we're growing programs, when we're taking risks and investing in content, there we're much more focused on experimenting and seeing, did something gain any sort of audience? Did we get any shareability out of that? When we're cross-promoting across our network, how did our audience react to it? So I think we're most concerned with our audience and making sure that we're serving their needs. And even if there's a brand involved, we want to make sure we're doing that. But if it's a piece of branded content, we need to make sure we deliver on those metrics. Typically, it's a view-based guarantee that we're going to have. More and more brands, I think, are interested in how people engage and how much that content is shared. And every program we do with a brand has promotion coming from us socially and usually editorially as well to make that happen and make it happen organically. So if that answers that question. In terms of how content producers can work with us, I would just say that it really, get to know our brands, get to know our content brands, get to know the stories we're telling. The verticals we're working in, as I said before, are comedy, gaming, entertainment, and pop culture, men's and women's lifestyle. We feel like we cover all the bases in terms of what the 12 to 34 audience wants to watch and consume. I know that's a very wide audience, but we really feel like we serve that audience quite well. So that's the first step to working with us.
Okay.
I think when you bring the branded content equation into the mix, it becomes complicated to talk about what is success, because I think that there's lots of ways that you can and lots of ways that you cannot measure that. One is purely a efficiency model, where it's we spent X on this and we got X return in audience. Hugely imperfect as a metric. It's not why you do things. I don't think you do things to reach people. You do things to engage people and to make a difference. And I would say, on some fundamental level, if you liked it and you associate brand to it, success number one, tier one success. Beyond that, are people trying to drive sales? Are they trying to increase affinity? They all have different goals, and those goals can be very difficult to measure explicitly respective to the piece of content you produced, especially because it's living in a much larger marketing ecosystem and it's probably relatively small in the mix. We did something, one of the last branded content pieces I did was with a big star on a big broadcast platform, got a huge number of video views and tremendous amount of positive PR and great comments. And I think that the brand said, and I don't know why. Partially it's the vagaries of the client service business and what goes on inside those organizations and what they constitute success. In the traditional content business, I would say, obviously numbers are important. Did you reach a significant audience? Increasingly in a measurable world, like in the digital environment, what was their share rate? What is the social footprint outside of the linear content experience? How much do people tweet about it? How many people follow it, like it, and so on? Can you measure sentiment? And can you measure engagement in terms of how long did they watch it and who did they share it with? And that becomes really important. And so I think that in a way it's easier to think about content because you're talking about pleasing an audience than it is to talk about branded content, where you're talking about pleasing a brand for a whole bunch of different reasons.
Okay.
So I think, first of all, from our perspective, we live in an era where there's so much content out there, linear, interactive, et cetera, that curation is more important than ever before. This is a world of aggregation. There's content coming out on a regular basis. There's more knowledge being produced every day than the last 50 years combined, or some stat like that. So I think organizations have got to curate more and more, and they can curate based on whatever biases they have, but I think that makes it a lot easier for the consumer. Once that curation happens, we in our organization measure consumer engagement. And there are various sub-attributes to that, social engagement and revenue, usage, et cetera. But first and foremost, it's about engagement, because if you've got a user engaged, there are many triggers that then can be applied and tweaked in order to be able to build revenue and profitability and so on. And I'll provide just a really quick, funny example of this. Dish is one of our customers in the US. And so we've had a gaming channel operating with them for quite some time. We've been curating it, I think, very effectively for quite a while. We actually produced at a very low cost a game called Hunting Trails. And as the name implies, it's a shoot a bunch of animals game. You've got these crosshairs, animals are popping up, and you start to shoot them. The engagement was okay, but it wasn't great. So then we thought, well, how do we engage better? So we set up leaderboards, and now it's competitive. So what we found is that people were competing every month and starting to engage more and more and more. And so then we thought, well, let's make it really competitive. We're going to tie the virtual world into the real world by giving away prizes. And man, engagement shot up like you wouldn't believe, because now it was bragging rights and you get a real prize. So somebody who'd been playing all month, who was number one on the leaderboard, but then dropped down to 5th place 2 days before the tournament was ending, they would go right back into the game, keep shooting up animals until they got to number one. Because if you were in the top 3 spots, you got prizes. For the number 3 spot, we would send you a $100 Walmart gift card. The number 2 spot, we would give you a choice of a $150 gift card or Omaha Steaks. And the number 1 spot, we would give you either a $200 Walmart gift card, Omaha Steaks, or we'd ship you a real buckhead. The number of buckheads we are shipping across the US, you guys would be blown away. So buckheads going like by FedEx to people's homes at Dish. And so we sort of coined the term, eat what you kill what you eat afterwards. But here's a game where we, I think, spent maybe $80,000 on the initial development. And our user engagement, I think at one point started becoming about $700,000 to $800,000 a year. And that's all profit and all margin because we're not really having to do a lot other than maintain these leaderboards. So that's why for us, engagement is about everything, because if we can engage, we'll figure out how to actually generate that revenue.
Julie, you want to talk about what you're looking for in success in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can never underestimate the power of prizing. So I think that's absolutely true.
Especially buckheads.
Especially, I want a buckhead, but I'm not sure I could play the game. But I think that's absolutely true. That's definitely one way of engaging. And I mean, I think success has to look like the broadest possible audience that's also the most engaged. So I think for all of us, really, that's what we're doing. And from my perspective, the most important thing that is universally appealing and has been from the beginning of time is that you need a good story and you need great characters, and then we can apply the rest of all of what we've talked about today to those things. And I think it's really important to know, though, as I said before, if you don't have a good story and you don't have good characters, you will not have any engagement, and you won't have a broad audience. It just will be a lot of, as we've talked about, good content out there that is just, or content out there that isn't a good story and doesn't have good characters and doesn't go anywhere.
Just to clarify then, and I'm not sure how many of you this applies to, but is it okay to come to you with a great idea, a great story and great characters? Or do you want people to come with you with ideas for how they think that could be leveraged across these
Both is
spaces?
great, but I mean, even, sometimes the way we're working too with brands and sponsors is we're not bringing them in. We're saying, here's the intellectual property associated with how we would deal with your brand or your sponsor from the beginning of the creation of this movement right till the end. So I think all is good. You just really have to be open to how that content is going to be used and developed and created and distributed.
Okay. I think we can open it up to questions now. I hope there's a mic somewhere.
Hi, how are you?
Great.
I'm over here. Two regulatory stories ran in the Globe and Mail today, and I'm just curious as to your opinions on them. One was that Google was found to contravene Canadian privacy laws by targeting ads to people's personal choices by the Canadian Privacy Watchdog. And I guess one of you's in the ad business or was in the ad business. How do you see that affecting the future of how people are going to be advertising? And the second one was Verizon won their appeal against the FCC, which is allowing them to now charge more or block web traffic through their system, which, considering the name of our panel being the level playing field, is it really level, and how's that, and do you think that's going to happen in Canada, and how do you think that's going to affect it?
Yeah.
Either any one of you can answer that.
In terms of net neutrality, I mean, the debate has been going on for a few years, and it's still in the courts. I don't think it's fully resolved yet, but I think it will affect, some of the bigger players in the space in terms of how they deliver content, and they might have to think about changing the models for how they deliver content. YouTube is one player that might be affected by that. Just considering the size of the network. There's been some discussions around going to a paid model for some of the larger channels, where you would subscribe to the channels. That's one thought, and someone like Netflix would also be impacted by that. So I think the jury's still out. I do hope we have an open and free internet. I think it's fair it's really, it's a right, and I do believe that it's important for independent creators as well as everyone to have the right to produce content and know that their audience is going to find it.
On the privacy topic, anyone have something to say about that, or how much do you think about that in terms of the way you're trying to leverage and engage people? How much does privacy come into that? I think that's part of the question.
I think that it's an issue with two sides. On the one side, if things are more relevant to you, it's better for you. The problem is, I think that a lot of people feel that the privacy issues and being tracked relentlessly by commercial interests is not something that they want. And so that's a balance that I think people will have to strike over time. I think the advertising community has had a pass because they've increasingly developed targeting and cookie-ing and all the kinds of things that lead to greater measurement and greater accountability for advertising online. It's been a huge area of growth in the industry, data and analytics and the whole discussion of big data. I think it has some natural limits where it's going to make people very queasy, and I think that we're at that point right now, and I think that obviously Edward Snowden and the NSA and that all contributes to the same discussion. I agree. I think that the net neutrality issue, on the surface, it seems highly anti-competitive. So.
But I think on that point, though, I think what we're seeing is the traditional organizational paranoia as we start to break down these barriers. I mean, I think it's a very good question, but there's a particular operator here in Canada that when Netflix first opened up, they actually dropped their per month bandwidth rates as well, so that if you actually exceeded that, you would get penalized. And so what's happening is traditional organizations are really trying to hang on to their territory, but they're doing it in very traditional ways. And there's going to be breakage at some point, and whether in Canada it's the CRTC passing certain laws prohibiting that, or if it's simply just that wave of consumers saying this is no longer allowed, and it's starting to cord cut or cord shift or what have you, we are going to start to see backlash in one form or another over the next few years.
We have the next question.
Thank you very much. My name's Beth, and I'm with Dundurn Press here in Toronto, and we are very grateful for the OMDC to have these opportunities, including an event they sponsored called From Page to Screen. And my comment is really based on what Julie said, which was it all begins with a good story. At Dundurn, we have 2,500 books in our backlist. We're doing 1,500 e-books, and we have a lot of content. And the Page to Screen event gives us that opportunity to meet producers, both television and film, and some digital producers. But I think there's a gap here. The thing about Canadian publishers, and we have an association of Canadian publishers, is that most of us have held on to all the rights for our properties. So we have a lot more flexibility than if you're dealing with an agent or if you're dealing with a sort of a very popular product like Harry Potter. And you can see yourself, the things that become popular on television are, to me, a mystery. The latest one is duck hunting.
Duck Dynasty.
Duck Dynasty. So I would like to find a way to be able, for Canadian publishers and for Ontario publishers in particular, to be able to connect with you more directly. At Dundurn, we do serious Canadian history, and we do paranormal and UFOs. So, and every Canadian Ontario publisher here has stuff. How do we connect?
I think that's a really good question, because there, again, if we just think about story and we think about the opportunity, I mean, I'm even just thinking about, something that debuted on CBC last week, Best Laid Plans, a political story. And, I think that there's absolutely ways to say, is this appropriate as a one-off movie of the week, or could this be the beginning of a television series? I think that from my own experience, the only way I consider stories that come from books are just what other people have told me or what I've read myself, or again, back to my children, what they're reading. But I think it's a very good source of looking at story and looking at character and saying, what can be made out of these original Canadian stories in this case, and also the idea that that the rights picture on stories like that is actually so clean is helpful. So I would just say absolutely more dialogue, and it has to be, I would think, one-to-one. I don't see, and the people that come to talk to me about story, some people just come in with an idea. It's a full range, so coming in with titles of books or just being able to talk about stories, I think is a perfectly acceptable way of doing it, for starters.
You have other questions? Yeah.
Yes, just continuing with the thought of Beth, but taking it into the magazine properties, and just like to ask you a question about that. If you have as a typical magazine, doing pretty well, have got a web presence, a certain amount of traffic and so on. But at a certain point, you can't go at it alone. And I'm just wondering at what point you go and talk to distributors and aggregators and that kind of thing. What's your advice on magazine, let's say in the lifestyle area, aimed at certain demographics and so on, but really reached a point where they can't continue in just as a sole organization?
Are you, just so I'm clear, you're a magazine publisher and also have a web presence, and you're what are you doing to cross the two platforms right now in terms of content? Are you driving viewers from or readers to explore what you have available online? Are the two platforms talking to one another?
Well, first of all, to clarify it, I'm just a lowly consultant, and I'm talking about a client who I'd prefer not to name, but yes, the two are very interrelated. They've excellent content, and I've got a good audience, but of course it's a big world, and they've got a fairly small presence. But to rather than going through the paid route to get in front of a lot of people, when I first heard you talking, Zach, I thought, well, geez, if you're just a little content provider, you're not going to get access to all the wonderful platforms that you have. It's a fairly small potatoes operation in that sense. But really, it could be quite profitable if you did it the right way and and build on what it has. So, how much time can you guys give in looking at new properties like that?
We are constantly expanding our network, and this sounds like it would be in the lifestyle space. I think we'd have to evaluate what the reach is and what we might be able to do to help amplify that existing online audience. In print, I don't know how much we would necessarily be able to help in that regard, but if it's amplifying online traffic and we think there's shared interests across what you're writing about, what we're writing about, we can cross-promote to one another and find I think a relationship there. I would also encourage the publisher to look at social as well as a way to drive traffic to the web property. It's really hard to connect print and online, but if you're already online and you're Tumblr, Facebook, these are great ways to drive traffic into your existing properties, and think about who's writing for these properties as well. What do they have? Because bloggers today have their own traffic as well. They have their own followers. So even thinking about bringing in new people with a certain expertise and can provide a certain perspective on the content.
Advertising is a big part of what you leverage all of that for, though, I think. So I'm just kind of wondering off of that, do you have a comment around, what people might need to give up or what they might need to be open to associating with if they want to make those kinds of partnerships? Should people be looking at?
Look, I think there's editorial and there's advertorial, and I think the lines blur, and I think that we, as an you always want to maintain your editorial voice. So for brands, sometimes I think you can drive revenue by engaging brands that are interested and understand where the line exists. News is one of those spaces that I think is very underrepresented in terms of brand sponsorship, because I don't think advertisers and news organizations have figured out the right way to work with one another and where the line can't be crossed. It's very different when you're producing entertainment. There's a different law to uphold. So I think I would encourage you to explore advertising opportunities, but also knowing sort of where that comfort level exists.
I think there's two challenges with news for advertisers. One is the historical sort of separation of church and state and the sort of sanctity of editorial purity, which is, I think, particularly important in news. You don't want the idea that advertisers are influencing that in some way. The other is the nightmare of adjacency, where you find yourself next to some atrocity story and it's the last thing in the world that you want, and brands are very afraid of that. That said, news organizations online especially have had great success in aggregating a highly engaged, regular 5-time-a-day audience. I would mention a couple of other things about the legacy publishers. Some interesting examples. One being, I thought that what Bloomberg Businessweek did with Henry Paulson was really interesting. It's a business publication in the United States. They decided that they would produce a documentary around the 5th anniversary of the financial crisis, with Henry Paulson looking back. History is sort of codified in some respects in their view in a 5-year period, so now we have some historical perspective on it. We're going to make a documentary with Joe Berlinger, an acclaimed, actually Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker. They sold the film to Netflix. They really expanded it. Now, I think from an advertising standpoint, that's something that you can really sell, because that's a big tentpole, high-profile transmedia property now. It's on the cover of the magazine, and it's a digital long-form property. It's got distribution via Netflix. It's really interesting, I think. Condé Nast and Hearst, 2 other big magazine groups in the States, struggling with this issue in terms of how do we see this hugely declining magazine, traditional print industry. We need to stay alive. We have valuable brands. We need to find some way to turn that into multimedia, transmedia properties that include video, include blogging, include much more real-time publication. And I think they have taken a bunch of different strategies. Hearst acquired a large piece of Mark Burnett's company, for instance, as a production resource and as an alternative way of producing content. Those are just a couple of examples of people struggling, I think, with that same issue. What do you do in a declining business where your brand is valuable, your content is valuable, but essentially your distribution channel is not that valuable?
Yeah, I just want
Julie
to
can
add
have
to
the last
that,
word, yeah.
because I think Adam's absolutely right. And on top of the fact that we have to think about all the digital and TV ways of distributing, the association with brands in the legacy businesses, which we're speaking about, is really critical. In the last month, for example, I've met with executives at Transcontinental Media about their brands, and also with St. Joseph's Media about their brands, and whether we can together come up with properties that would make sense and travel across. If you've got a strong brand, it starts with that, and I think there are other ways to think about how print and television and digital all support each other, because if you're trying to get a new idea out there, you need all the firepower you can possibly get. So I think it's something to be thinking of too as a content maker, as print.
All right. I think we have to leave it there. Thank all of our panelists for being here today. It's fantastic. Thank you.
I add my thanks to a very interesting discussion, and I'm going to go over some of those points, but I'll let the panelists leave the stage because we're going to have a change-up we're going to directly into the next panel, which is essentially about money. How do you find it? How do you get it? How do you make it in this digital world? We're going to try to dissect some of those big questions. But while our new panel is getting settled, lots of takeaways there. I'm always fascinated going to conferences where you get to step out of your regular job and find ideas, and sometimes they're ones you don't expect. Like this morning, I got a parenting tip from Julie, who's got her own focus group, and I realized, rather than running the losing battle with my teenage sons about how much they're in front of their laptops consuming content, maybe I should ask them and use them as my focus group about what they are watching. I have one who's an interactive gamer. I think I better find out what he's doing in order to influence what I'm doing, because what I've learned in the last year is that one of my teenagers is more likely to discover the ins and outs and the very complex situation in Syria through one of the YouTube influencers that he regularly dips into than he is to go online and find my story about Syria. And that was a huge aha. And I went, uh-oh. My world is changing, and then I started to think, well, what is that YouTube influencer saying, and how is he creating that content that interests my son a little bit more than his mother's story? Now, there could be, the fact I'm his mother, and he'd rather watch anything but me. But I think there's some, middle ground there, and it is something that I think as traditional broadcasters, that part of our business still, we have to figure out and grapple with. And these aren't people who are telling him lies about Syria or, point of view. These are great talkers who are saying in plain language, here's what's going on, and he watches them. So fascinating there. I was delighted to hear from Julie, a story is a story is a story, because those of us who have been storytellers for years, no matter what platform, are reassured by that. And I'm frankly a little bit afraid of the next electoral coverage on television when somebody might hashtag something about me being drunk or whatever, maybe stupid. You know, Susan Ormiston is stupid hashtag is frankly a little scary out there. So anyway, lots of good ideas there.